not only 6 years of balanced budget, but of growth. The results of those budgets have been putting Minnesota at one of the top states in the country, whether it's #1 in healthcare and healthcare access, whether it's one of the best states to raise a child, whether it's family personal income in the top 10, or whether it's top 10 in fiscal stability, both short-term and long-term, as well as being one of the few states in the country AAA bond rated because of our fiscal responsibility. We've invested in the things that made a difference in people's lives. We're rebuilding our infrastructure. We're tackling the issues of worker training and child care, and we've made it simply children can go to school and eat. Those are the things that we focused on and we will continue to focus on. And we've got some work to do, as the rest of the states and the rest of the country has, in trying to look at a changing demographic and long-term costs. So in this budget, I want to focus on just a few things today. Responsible cuts. And I say that because we're going to see some of the drivers in long-term, while we have a surplus now and we will have a surplus at the end of this year, long-term drivers in a few areas are going to have to be addressed so that we can continue to invest, whether it's investing in outdoor, like we did last year with the DNR, or investing in our children's future in education. Those things are going to be a smaller and smaller part of the budget if we don't address it. We're going to talk about lowering taxes and a historic move for the first time in Minnesota history, reducing the sales tax. And those are things that are going to impact people directly. And thinking about that, if there are changes on the federal level around tariffs, those are going to be felt by Minnesota families. We're going to take a proactive move to make that first time that we've ever enacted a sales tax decrease, and closing loopholes around that, making sure that it's fair. If people are paying sales tax, making sure it's fair that there aren't people getting out of that, and then addressing the issue around fraud. These are not just crimes against taxpayers, they're crimes against children. And every single dollar that's lost is a lost opportunity to make those improvements. And just like in private business, we need to have the tools necessary on that. We need to make sure, and we'll talk a little bit about that as we rolled out last week, ways that we can make a difference in the metrics in that. So let me just start of where we're at. The November forecast came out, and in February, we will get the harder numbers. We saw December revenue numbers that were significantly, I believe, 7.2% higher, around $400 million. But we'll have a better idea if that shakes out in February when we come back with a revision. But as it stands right now, the fiscal year budget for 26-27 has about $1.5 billion on the bottom line, and then the structural imbalance, which we'll get into, and we talked about here during the November forecast, and the projected balance. Under the budget that we are proposing for our administration today, we'll have $2.1 billion on the bottom line. We will erase half of the structural deficit in this first budget years, and we will have a remaining balance at the end in 28-29. More importantly, the out years going into 2035 and beyond, we will have addressed and stopped and capped and got flatter on those long-term drivers that at some point in time become unsustainable. So I'd like to get into it a little bit on this. You heard me talk about this, and just to be very clear, the state share of Medicaid waiver and home care spending. And the chart you're seeing here goes from 2018. You see that dip in 21-22, and the reason for the dip there was the federal COVID money that came in. And then you see the increased spending. The dark line is the projected spending out to 28-29. Our budget shows a flattened approach to this. And I want to be very clear. We're able to do this with a savings of about $1.3 billion during this without denying single access to a single person in Minnesota. This is the one area of the budget that does not have the guardrails around it and is basically on autopilot. And I want to illustrate this a little clearer for the critiques on this. Minnesota and this administration, we care deeply about making sure that every single Minnesotan gets the care, gets the services they need, get them delivered in a timely manner. We do this better on any metric that's out there than any other state. That is not going to change. The difference is what you can see on the next slide. This is a list of the 50 states and the costs they spend on these same things. The median, as you look at, is about $25,000. Minnesota's at $53,000. And if you go back to the chart we just looked at, that will exponentially increase if we don't make the move around this. The next nearest state is about $40,000. Wisconsin falls about around New Hampshire in the middle. Now look, we are not changing. The Minnesota is a generous state, Minnesota is a state that cares deeply that every single individual should live the fullest quality of life they can. We will continue to be able to do that, but there are things that we can do in this, and you will hear from Commissioner Campbell and Budget Director Mingy about what that looks like in more specifics. But this alone is the biggest driver. If we go back and do not make the move on this budget, by the end of the 2029 fiscal year, this will be an entire eighth of the entire budget of all of Minnesota, projected to go up from there. So by about 2035 or whatever, half of the state budget. This one has to be addressed, and this budget does that. It does it responsibly, it does it morally, it does it ethically, and we get the outcomes that we need to get. Another area we see this in, and it's very specific on this to give you an idea of these drivers, special education transportation costs. I'm not talking about special ed. I'm not talking about the federal government's inability to provide what they promised on special ed. We will continue, and I, as a teacher and someone with my entire family in this, will continue to follow the law and implement exactly what we need to do. But this one area, if you look at this and you're seeing on the side, these are transportation costs alone. The state of Minnesota reimburses 100%. The proposal that we put forward here is reimbursing 95% and asking districts and local to be more efficient and figure out how do we reduce that. And just to give you an idea, the increase between fiscal year 2025 and fiscal year 2027 is about $140 million in this area alone. So those are out there, and I welcome all ideas with hard numbers. I'm sure my Republican friends will offer ways they can do this. If you wanted to find that much savings in state agencies, you would have to cut the entire Department of Natural Resources. Every single person, every single computer, every single building, every single state park to find those types of savings. So these are smart, focused moves that start to show savings in areas that we excel in, but we can still get those same results with some pretty common sense things to implement. And I would note, especially on the healthcare waivers, a blue ribbon commission was put together 10 years ago, Democrats, Republicans, nonpartisan, private sector. And they came up with suggestions, and that was one of their #1 suggestions that needed to be addressed. So that driver, this is no surprise to anybody, that 10 years ago it was predicted we would be exactly where we're at on this. And we have not had the ability or put forward to get this done. This is the year to do it. This is very bipartisan. We're cutting state spending. We're cutting it responsibly. We're making a difference in long-term fiscal stability without making Minnesotans sacrifice the quality that they're already getting. Now, sales tax and tax loopholes on this. We're proposing, let's see if we can get it up here. Let me come back to this one. We're proposing 0.075 reduction in the state sales tax across the board. And we're also asking that we close loopholes in the state sales tax. For example, if a tree falls in your yard and you hire someone to remove that tree, you pay sales tax on that. If you call your stockbroker and make a deal, you do not pay sales tax on that. And so what this does is the vast majority of people and the vast majority of where they pay sales tax see this reduction and making sure there's a fairness to this. Why do we have sales tax on funeral escorts and we don't have them on speaking to a lawyer? Those are things that there's not a fairness to the system. If you implement this, you will see the vast majority, and Commissioner Marquardt can talk a little bit about this, studies that have been done over a significant period of time, that the average family will see the reduction in this. Now, the reason that we're bringing this up and addressing it is we're listening to the experts on this. If some of you recall in November, Dr. Becker, the state economist, made note of this. This is not just Minnesota. This chart is what you're showing is consumer spending, which is the biggest impact on the economy. And traditionally, consumer spending has been fairly consistent, but goods and services, people buying things, outpaced buying hard things on the goods. The services piece was lower. What you're seeing in this is a change, whereby this year, you're already starting to see services significantly outpace goods. And what that does is the sales tax is one of the most consistent and dependable pieces to state budgeting because it's the most consistent. That is changing now because of a changing in spending behaviors. So what the change to the sales tax does is brings more consistency and more predictability around that, and it brings fairness back into who is paying the sales tax, so that it's not, once again, lower and working class people pay sales tax on everything they buy. Again, why would you pay sales tax on your tires when you wouldn't pay it on adjusting your trust fund or whatever it may be? Those are just a fairness to how it's done. So we think these are two areas that can make a significant difference, and it makes an impact on Minnesotans to see a sales tax decrease. And again, I would say this very well, I would assume that the promise will be kept, that if tariffs are put on, those will be impacted on sales tax because of the cost of things will go up. Anti-fraud package, we've talked about this. Making sure, again, every Minnesotan should have an expectation, just like every business has an expectation, that if people are trying to steal from you, and whether it's shoplifting to the tune of $125 billion that we see some of the largest corporations centered in Minnesota experience this too, we need to tackle it. And that better detection means using the tools that are out there. We know that we can do this through AI. We know that there's things that we can make a difference on. Tighter controls. We have to have the ability, because I can tell you it is maddening, it is frustrating, it is unacceptable to me and Minnesotans is, why do we not have the authority when some organization has committed fraud in one aspect of state government, but we are precluded from stopping them when they're doing it in another aspect of state government? We have to have the tools to say, if you're stealing from the Department of Education, we are going to hold your contract up at the Department of Human Services or wherever it might be. Those types of things give us more ability. And then, quite honestly, on this, you've heard me talk about this, is we just have to be skeptical of folks right now. And that doesn't mean that Minnesota is not as generous. I think giving us the tools, giving us the legal authority to do that, making sure that we have now the BCA centered in charge of this, that we have criminal investigators that are there, and making sure that it is culturally throughout every single institution. Look, these are good public servants trying to deliver services to their fellow Minnesotans, but if you're not doing it tightly, I am reminding all of the people in this administration, every dollar that goes out to fraud, even when we get them and we recoup what we can, that is one less dollar that was meant for the things that we wanted it to do, whether that is building roads or feeding children. And then I'm asking for tougher penalties. I think so many times this is seen as somehow like white-collar crime, and it's crime against the state. Yes, it's crime against state taxpayers. It's stealing from them, but it's crimes against children, because many of these programs are aimed at families to try and improve their lives, and we don't have the ability to do it. So I'm going to ask the legislature to give us more authority. We're going to have BCA investigators over there in charge of that unit. We're going to make sure culturally we're being as tough as we can on it. We're going to use AI, and we're going to ask the legislature to give us the authority that if we believe it's there, to make sure that we can step forward and stop those payments. And there may be some cases where we stop the payments and have to go back and make it, but so be it. So I think combination of those things puts us in a position that I will say so again. Now, I've heard this tossed around. No, state government is too big. Let's just cut across the board. Just cut. You can tighten your belt. Well, here's the thing. It's easy to say that. If you ask taxpayers, do you want a tax cut? Yes. Do you want state spending cut? Yes. Do you want your school to have fewer teachers? No. Do you want your road to not be fixed? No. So you have to be honest with people of where you're going to do it. So in this case, I hear just 5% across the board. Not only is that lazy way to do it, it's fiscally irresponsible, because if you do 5% across the board, this is what you end up with. If you do 10% across the board, or some whatever magic number you make up, you still don't address the structural imbalance that is caused by two major drivers. So this is one where I think, and I'm hoping that it comes this way, there's going to be bipartisan support to this, because we're cutting state spending, we're getting more efficiencies in the delivery of service, we're cutting taxes, the sales tax, to the vast majority of Minnesotans. We're asking the state and asking for the tools and asking for the responsibility to make sure there's no fraud in these programs and protect those programs that people really like and want to make a difference. We're in the black. We're in a solid position. But if we set and rest on our laurels, it will be eaten up by these drivers. And if you cut state government by 10%, you won't eliminate the short-term deficit, but you do absolutely nothing, and you will be right back in the same situation, but worse, next year, where then you cut another 10%. So over the next 10 years, You could cut 100% of state government and you would still be in the black because of those drivers if you're required to do them. It doesn't make any sense. So I come back to this again. There should be compromise on this. There should be the capacity to be able to structure this budget in a way that looks like this. And you're still delivering the services. You're still cutting down on the waste. You're still making sure that the programs that people care about, they get. And we reduce this deficit in a smart way. We leave a surplus on the bottom line, and we move Minnesota, continuing to move Minnesota in a way that we're thinking about and investing in the future, whether it's a clean energy technology, where it's working on developing our workforce around med tech, where it's growing our exports, which we have done in an unprecedented manner, puts us in a good position. This is doable. It's doable, as I said again, without denying services to a single person and able to get the results that we're looking for. So we're proud of this budget. It's one, again, that I would say is there's gonna be a lot of numbers throwing out. What's interesting in Minnesota is that we are constitutionally required, and I'm putting out my numbers to this. You will not see, I don't believe, since my 6 years that I've been doing this, I have not seen hard numbers from the Republican legislatures before May 10th on any single given year. I think this would be the year. Put those numbers out. I'm open to it. If you can show me how to get to a place where we can continue to deliver the services to Minnesotans, we continue to be responsible, we can continue to keep our high quality of life that people are expected of, and getting the results that you see on the right side of this slide, I'm open to hearing it. I'm open to seeing it. But you don't just get to throw around, well, if we just cut this or we just did that. Show me the numbers. And that's what Commissioner Campbell and Lieutenant Governor will show you a little bit here. Commissioner Campbell, if you're ready.
Good afternoon. My name is Erin Campbell. I'm the Commissioner at Minnesota Management and Budget. Today, Governor Walz has presented a smart, responsible to $2.116 billion. That's an increase of more than $570 million, and it creates a projected positive balance of $355 million in the next biennium, in fiscal years 28-29. This budget also takes aim at the structural imbalance impacting our bottom line. In the November forecast, the structural imbalance was $3.5 billion before inflation, and the governor's budget reduces that by 50% to less than $1.8 billion. It also addresses the fastest growing programs, bringing spending growth in those areas to more sustainable levels. The budget slows growth of disability waivers and health and human services spending more broadly, while maintaining Minnesotans' access to services. Reductions to waivers total $1.3 billion over the next 4 years. The largest change there is capping automatic inflation adjustments at 2% per year, which will save the state more than $600 million over the next 4 years. It also creates incentives to lower spending for special education transportation, saving the state some $50 million in each of the next 2 biennia. Finally, it broadens our sales tax base to respond to changes in consumer spending patterns that we highlighted in our November forecast, where the purchasing of services is growing faster than the purchasing of goods, leading to slower growth in our sales tax revenues. In short, this budget does exactly what we needed. It addresses a structural imbalance. It brings spending on the fastest growing programs in the budget to more sustainable levels. It broadens the sales tax base while providing the first ever rate reduction in statewide sales taxes. And it increases a projected positive balance not only in the 26-27 biennium, but also in the planning years and beyond. I want to thank Governor Walz for his leadership and hard work in putting together a budget that works for Minnesotans. That I'll turn it to the Lieutenant Governor.
All right. Well, good afternoon. So we have incredible services here in Minnesota, and to protect those services, we have put together a responsible and balanced budget. That's exactly what this is. But this budget does not stand alone. This budget protects progress and solidifies the things that Minnesotans love and need, like meals at school and a nation-leading child tax credit for families. The historic progress we made in 2023 did more good for children, families, women, educators, health professionals, and Minnesotans than ever before. Paid family and medical leave, workforce training, historic investments in housing, reproductive freedom, child care grants, background checks, and red flag laws. We set a new standard for every state, and we owe it to Minnesotans to continue that progress forward. And let me be clear, none of these historic investments, none of them caused this imbalance, and rolling back the 2023 progress would put us in the same fiscal position. So we will not roll back this historic progress, and we will not put the state in a financial place where that is ever a question. This budget is that additional security for our state. With that said, state budgets naturally fluctuate, but it's our responsibility to Minnesotans to keep the economy stable, your lives consistent, and keep the services you rely on running far into the future. Or more simply put, it can sometimes feel like a bit of a roller coaster in these buildings and at the Capitol. But these behind-the-scenes adjustments we're proposing today will keep life smooth on the outside. The governor covered a lot of information, so I want to highlight just a few takeaways. This budget focuses on managing funds in areas that we know will grow in demand by providing a consistency in service access for the long term. We are also holding giant corporations like insurance companies seeing historic profits right now more responsible for their share in supporting Minnesotans' health and wellness instead of just their bottom line. And then we will have spending areas that I am also excited about, and I think Minnesotans should be too. We are continuing to invest in sustainable aviation fuel, or more affectionately known as SAF. SAF is the very best of us. It is a public, private, and nonprofit sectors coming together with agriculture and innovation to launch our economy forward while taking major steps to protect our climate. This budget also includes research and development tax credit, which is crucial to maintaining Minnesota's status as a hub for innovation. Investing in creativity and problem solving on some of the world's toughest issues in our own backyard will benefit everyone. Because as Minnesotans, that's simply what we do. And the point of all these pieces together, they make up a real plan, not just political talking points. This budget protects our progress, stabilizes areas of government that have jumped in demand, and ensures shared responsibility in helping Minnesotans. And all of that, we still have $355 million in the bank. There is no other equation or rational argument that leaves us with that much economic longevity and success. This is a complicated budget with lots of numbers and what ifs, but this is also what a responsible, well thought out plan looks like. A plan that will set up Minnesotans for long-term success and stability. Minnesotans, we have been there for you, and we will continue to be there for you. Thank you. And with that, the governor and I and this whole cast of characters will take some questions.
Thanks, Lieutenant Governor.
Yep,
Give me just one
absolutely.
second. I'd just like to come back to, and again, because of anticipating some of the questions, we go. Just to be clear, the changes that we're talking about making still leaves Minnesota at the top. And an acknowledgement of this is coming out of putting statutorily the highest amount into our rainy day funds, restabilizing and paying off our entire debt to the unemployment insurance fund from the COVID pandemic, sending checks back to Minnesotans, and paying off the Viking Stadium and a few other things. So I just want to be very clear in this. The stability of state government is why the bonding agencies rate us as AAA, but I will note, they highlighted these areas of concern over long-term budgeting deficits. But I want to be clear, those who say and make the case and try and say, we don't care, and we're trying to balance the budget on the backs of this, nothing could be further from the truth. So I would remind you, this chart would look us shorter, but still at the top. With that, questions?
What are these priorities? Would be your top 3 bullet points of budget cuts, lowering taxes, adopting fraud? That kind of sounds like
It's a responsible budget that you address accordingly, that you invest where you need to. It makes a difference. We'll see where the numbers are. We'll see where the numbers are. My guess is there'll be tax cuts for the wealthy, that there will be programs cuts that they don't like. But look, I think it's incumbent, and I've always said this, if I welcome them to bring the numbers and look like this is what we have always ran on. And I want to remind folks, we are in the black. We are AAA bond rated. We have a surplus at the end of this. We could ignore this, and we could put that up there and show you, oh, it's no problem, we're all good on this or whatever, kick that can down the road to 28, 29, but that's irresponsible budgeting. So no, I think this is responsible. I agree with you on this one, Mary. I think there will be big buy-in from them because I think it looks really good. And if we can together collectively make this happen, solid shape. Yeah, well, tariffs will basically function as a national sales tax that will come on to you. And what we're doing is let's make the first move on this, reduce Minnesota sales tax. Let's make it fair so there's folks coming out there. Because look, I assume they're going to keep their word. I assume when President-elect Trump made the promises on the campaign trail, he's got 3 days to fix the Ukraine war, which he said he would do before he went to office. So I assume then he will, after that, they will do the tariffs that they said. But quite honestly, those are every economist and every person in America knows. If they follow through with that, that's going to add costs. We want to be proactive on the front end of this and say we're cognizant of that. That's a choice that they get to make. That's a consequence of an election. Here in Minnesota, we're gonna reduce that down. And look, it works. It's able to do it. It balances the budget, and it saves people money on that sales tax piece. And I think bringing that fairness into that, it was Commissioner Marquardt who told me that. I did not know that they taxed funeral escorts in this, that is taxed. How that got decided at some point in time, but calling your stockbroker to buy Google stock or something, that doesn't make any sense to me. So I think that works fine.
Governor, can you explain the sales tax bit a little more? I'm probably totally misunderstanding what you said, but are you talking about eliminating?
I'm going to let Commissioner Marquardt come up here and explain this one and what we're going to do.
If I may follow up on that, can you specify whether the sales tax will be extended to all professional services or just specific ones?
Yeah, so Paul Marquardt, Commissioner, Department of Revenue, and Governor Walz very well articulated the policy need and the fairness need for making these long overdue improvements to the sales tax code. And so what it does is it cuts the rate from 6.875% to 6.8% and increases and expands the base to more services. Now, those services are legal, banking, brokerage, and accounting. But there are certain carve-outs from that. For example, if you're claiming the child tax credit or the working family credit, that is still tax exempt. If you're going to legal aid, that's still tax exempt. If you have pension services dealing with defined contributions and so forth, those are still tax exempt, and also bank overdrafts and so forth. So certain things are pulled out of there. But as the governor talks about, this is really about fairness. We already tax several services: laundry service, lawn care. If you, on a slippery day, go into the ditch, that service to tow you out of the ditch is taxed. If your building or home suffers flood damage or fire damage, that cleanup is taxed. So we already do all of these things. This is a real fairness issue. It's really creating more equity and fairness in the application of this law.
Commissioner, you were a lawmaker during the Ventura administration 25 plus years ago when he proposed about the same thing, of a lowering and broadening of the base, and it failed. It changed policy.
Yeah, so one of the things that is a big difference to point out here is this does not involve any business-to-business taxes. And when you look at services, that is a majority of your services that currently are not taxed are business to business. So if I own a landscaping business and I hire an accountant, that is not taxed right now. This is just the final consumer. And so both Governor Ventura and Governor Dayton had a huge amount in the business to business, which causes tax pyramiding and some other things that layers costs on. So this is making an incremental, needed, long overdue change in the tax code that not only creates this fairness that the governor's talking about, but also, as we know, sales tax is a more stable tax. So it's going to make a stronger revenue tax code in the long term to help fund important services. And it's right-sizing our tax code to a more increasing service-orientated economy. So as in 1967, when Minnesota first initiated the sales tax at 3%, and by the way, we were the second to the last state in the union to come up with a sales tax. At that time, 60% of the economy were goods, 40% services. That has basically flipped today, as that one chart said, as our state economist mentioned in the forecast. So,
Commissioner, help us with the math. So like on a $100 purchase, what would a consumer be saving?
that would be about 75 cents. So, and again, you look at a business who may do $1 million of purchase of lumber or something, that's $750. So it's about a $95 million cut. It's about 1.1% of your sales tax is what that will equate to for a person. And so, it's significant. As the governor has mentioned, this would be the first, if enacted, the first sales tax rate cut in the history of the state.
Governor, any concern about what the elements of the surcharge on HMOs will do to healthcare costs?
Oh, I'm always concerned about healthcare costs, and what we're saying is that surcharge, and then also on reinsurance, is that, and you've seen it, Americans are deeply concerned about that insurance companies denying claims, doing those things. We're asking for more efficiencies out of them. We're asking them to make sure that they're continuing to contain costs and making sure, once again, I go on the reinsurance rate, we've been using that out of the general fund to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars each year, where we're going to ask the insurance companies to do that. They have shown great profitability over this time, and I believe they can absorb it.
Mayor Davis is already on social media saying that the sales tax on services seems to be a non-starter for them. They say no tax increases this session, period.
It's a tax decrease.
Wiggle room for Republicans on that. Can you get that from the House?
Well, I'm proposing a tax cut, and so we're asking for fairness in this. If they're protecting rich folks wanting to go to their broker, they can make that case to the people of Minnesota. I'm saying, why are you paying tax on your damn tree trimmer, and they're not paying it on going to their broker, or going to their lawyer, or going to their accountant? Most people don't do an account. They fill out their tax forms on their own. So we're going to have this debate. Again, I haven't said anything's a non-starter today. Doesn't seem to be negotiating in good faith, that they're just looking at this, they can look at the details. When did Republicans oppose a sales tax cut? That's what I don't get. To protect a very small carve-out that has been there. I don't know. My guess, I talked to Commissioner Marquardt, I guess the banking lobby was stronger than the funeral escort lobby when they cut this out. Why should they not be treated the same?
To be clear, Governor, you are proposing a statewide rate cut to the sales tax, but you are also trying to raise.
It's a net decrease.
Other services that are not already.
It's a net decrease, bringing fairness to it. At the end of the day, taxes for Minnesotans will go down 95 million, is that the decrease? Now, depending on how much services they use. So we're bringing fairness to it. If you're not using any of those services right now, which tends to fall in the upper brackets, you're going to see the decrease. But it's a fairness issue. Why should those have been exempt when other things weren't? Yep. Commissioner?
Sure, go ahead, Peter. Hi.
Reducing how much you're spending per capita. And then say, you were going to be served with just a general spend. It seems like outreach. So how do you reduce that per capita number now and going forward without it impacting services? East Smoke Grove,
Yeah, so I'll let our budget directors speak to the specific numbers. However, what I would say is, like, for instance, the biggest portion of this is related to reducing the inflationary growth to 2%. So that had been at a higher percentage. The impact on the out years is significant because they sort of catch up. And so in that way, the biggest portion of it is really just saying, we are assuming 2% inflationary growth in the rate. So, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Anna Miggy, State Budget Director at MMB. So as you recall, there are two factors that are driving the cost, how much we spend on disability waivers. It's the number of people we serve and how much we spend per person. The governor's recommendation does not affect the number of people we serve. It's focusing on the cost of serving each person. As the commissioner said, the largest single proposal is capping automatic inflationary adjustments, and those are based, they're updated every 2 to 3 years based on specific data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics with the intention of tying it to growth in certain wage sectors. But that has, in recent years, grown really significantly. For example, under the current forecast, in January of 2026, we'll be implementing a 12% rate increase for just 2 years of inflationary growth, so more than, about 6% annually, which is faster than the state's revenue grows. And so the proposal would be to bring the automatic inflator down to 2%, which is more in line with what we've done recently, such as increases on the general education formula. We did that in 2023 with, tied to inflation, but within the 2 to 3% range with a floor and a cap. So this would be setting it closer to what we do in education. Certainly, if those increases aren't adequate, then that could be something that's discussed and considered by the legislature.
Can you help us with some plain English language here when we talk about things like Medicaid waivers, terms like that? What are we talking about?
So when we are talking about Medicaid waivers and specifically disability waivers here, we're talking about home and community-based services for people with disabilities who are eligible for Medicaid. So without getting too much in the weeds, the reason we say waiver is that the federal government, the Social Security Act, requires that states offer people access to institutional care, things like nursing facilities. But what we've all learned is that people fare better when they're served in the community. So states can opt to provide services to people in their homes and in their communities, and those are also delivered at lower cost than if people were served in nursing facilities. So that's what we're talking about: residential services, individual support services to help people with their daily, their daily activities, things that allow them to live in community rather than in a nursing facility.
How do you growth on that?
So this results in lower rates paid to providers in the sector. And those are, the way that providers across Medicaid manage their costs sort of varies between, things like, it could be wages, it could be other operating costs. So it really sort of depends.
But to that point, your governor, can you speak to, if you're cutting those services, then
Yeah.
to those two main drivers, potentially school districts and transportation, seniors in nursing homes, how are you preserving services?
Yeah, I want to level set on this too, back to that one slide. 38 states have waiting lists that means people can't even get services. We are not one of them. Obviously, we're the most generous on this. What it is right now, because this is on autopilot, there's no incentive to negotiate. Republicans should be flocking to this, because this is a case that the free market is not working, because if we automatically kick it up, isn't it amazing that's what they charge every single time, even though that's not what they're charging in other places. The market is a bit distorted by us being on autopilot. So we're not saying any of those services have to get. What we're saying is we need to do a better job of negotiating out there. We need to have the counties working as partners with us in this, making sure they get there. No one is proposing a wait list. No one is proposing. We are staying in that top tier of states that you don't have to wait for the services. But once again, I will go back to this, and I think it gets brought up. If we were on that chart, if we were in the middle, I'm going to go to this. even if we were in the middle and we were proposing this, I think there's an argument to be made, or you're getting it. Now, I'm not going to make the case that New Hampshire doesn't care about their people. I assume they do, or Mississippi at the end, how they're doing that. The fact is, this distortion, and this is, am I right on this, Anna? This is 2022. It has grown up exponentially since then, so this is probably closer to 60. And so what we're saying is, let's find the cost drivers, don't put it on autopilot. The legislature has every capacity to work with us on this to help figure out how to do it, and I am absolutely convinced that the quality of care that they're getting in some of these other states, we can deliver it better than them, and we should be able to deliver it at a better price. And that was a suggestion 10 years ago by the Blue Ribbon Commission that was Democrats, Republicans, private sector advocates saying you got to get a handle on this. And again, I will bring this up. At the growth rate we're at, by 28, 29, it's an eighth of the budget. By mid-2030s, half. That's what's going to happen. And again, nobody's getting left off, getting more efficiencies out of it.
What would you tell me if I looked at this and said, this doesn't appear to be enough? It kicks the can down the road, but after 29, it would appear that you're headed right back into predicting negative deficit.
This is where I would respond, it's the reason you get a mortgage, because you're not going to pay that house off tomorrow, but you're making a long-term plan to make sure it's done. This is the first budget. So I'll let Commissioner talk about it. This puts us on a path because those costs are reduced.
Yeah. So the governor's proposed budget solves it leaves a positive balance on the bottom line in fiscal years 28 and 29 when you're not counting inflation. So what's left is really inflation, and that's discretionary inflation. And so that is really, that's money that has not been allocated, and that would be up to the next, the legislature and the governor in fiscal years 28, 29 to decide what they want to do with that. Are they going to spend it? In which case, then they've got to figure out how to balance that budget.
But in this case, by 2030, there's a deficit.
No. It's far too early to know that.
Governor, what about seniors and nursing homes? We've heard nursing homes say for quite some time that they're absolutely in crisis. Is there an increase in assisted living fees? Are there cuts to senior services here?
Sure. So the governor's budget is, if you can see on the two-page spreadsheet from us, does propose some cost savings in our nursing home payment. The largest thing here is parallel to what the governor has proposed for disability waivers, is proposing capping the automatic inflationary adjustments for the nursing facility value-based reimbursement formula. That is just simply the statutory formula that determines how much Medicaid pays nursing facilities.
Assisted living, that's all 54%? Assisted living fees?
No, I don't, oh, I'm sorry, you're right. There are some increases to our assisted living licensure fees, yes, in the state government special revenue fund. Thank you for that reminder. The state government special revenue fund has, similarly to the general fund, a structural imbalance. And the governor is proposing some increases to a variety of fees that support those programs because the cost of regulating certain industries have exceeded the revenues that their licensing fees bring in addition to some of the ability to keep up with regular and statutorily required inspection schedules is just not supported by current staffing levels. So there is an increase to assisted living licensure fees.
Nursing homes are closing,
Yeah.
there's prices up and
Yeah, it's expensive, it's hard. I would note this, that the cost of nursing, and I want to get this right, from in the last 10 years has increased 100%. It has outpaced inflation by 80-some percent. So the cost on nursing homes, we have to address that. We also know that in rural areas where people want to stay, it becomes more difficult because the economy of scale issue. Smaller nursing homes where people want to be, you still have to pay for that RN, you still have to pay for that quality. And what we know is families are paying an incredible amount for this. So I would say this issue, look, Minnesota is no different than any other state. Nationally, this issue of long-term care insurance, the backing of the federal government to help us with that is going to be absolutely critical. We are not reducing on those, but we're lowering the cost to try and make it more manageable. But again, the one-time payment that was made at the end to the nursing homes that was made to say they can keep open, it didn't change the cost drivers one bit. And so it's not the way to approach this. It's the long-term cost of this. What we know in Minnesota, we rank #1 for keeping people in their homes the longest. That's the real goal, to have people live as independently as possible, to live as long. And it's the reason that AARP ranks Minnesota the best state to age in. But addressing this issue, the cost, you can't have something go up 100%. We can't keep pace with that. We're going to have to figure that out. And then this is one of those along with healthcare. Very difficult to solve healthcare in the bubble, in the microcosm, when the environment is nationally. We have to do something. And again, I fear that all of that will be exacerbated if the ACA goes away, because then you have all of those issues that come with that.
So how can you say a $95 billion cut when your own budget book says it raises $205 million?
For the sales tax cut that we get on those, is that right, Paul, the number that comes out of the estimates? The net. Pardon me? Absolutely.
We made some decisions this week regarding the commissioner at the agency, Jeff, and we also announced a change of the inspector general of that agency. Those didn't come.
Well, look, the first thing I want to say about Commissioner Harpstead, Jody Harpstead, someone who spent their entire life in public service, whether it's at Lutheran Social Services or now serving the state. He has done a fantastic job. She ushered through something that had been being talked about in this state for over 2 decades, dividing that agency, which was too big and too unmanageable, and splitting it into our children, youth, and families. And so I'm grateful for her. This was a time where her choice to step down from the agency. She is going to be missed. That agency is leaning into, as all our agencies are, this issue of, and look, someone brought it up, but I take offense to this, that is this turning a blind eye? It's not turning a blind eye. I do think the thing is a culture of caring that in some cases has to be more skeptical. So no, they're not related on that. The timing is her timing to step down as we move this next agency over. IG is moving back over to work in another agency on that. And I think you're going to see this probably in several agencies. As we refocus this over at the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, we see those folks over there, that we're really going to focus on this. It's a law enforcement. It's an inspector heavy enterprise that we're on. So I think you'll see a little more of that as we shift folks over to BCA.
Governor, just a broad question to this unprecedented start to the session. Do you see the governing dynamics changing? Will things get back on track?
They'll get back on track. The voters voted. You got a one vote majority, and I appreciate the senators work this out. They'll work together. The voters split the House, 67-67. We'll work together on that, and I would encourage them to get back to work on that. That's what will happen. So.
Can you address further what's going on in the House and the legal challenges?
Yeah, the House is not organized at this time. There is no quorum. We understand it's 67-67. That was the will of the voters. On January 28th, that special election will happen. I would anticipate it will end up being 67-67 on that date, and then they can organize as they were working towards, as the Senate has done in this intermediate period till the special election over in the Senate district is filled, to work together. So yeah, I think this is a short-term issue that will be corrected on the 29th. That will be the will of the public, and trying to use this vacancy to create a 2-year majority that doesn't exist is not the way to go about it. And again, better spent on bringing us numbers on this. If you don't like a sales tax cut, bring us your ideas. So they'll get organized. I think the business, but again, I would say this, I would encourage them. You've all been through this so many times, and I'm old hand at it now. We're going to wait till May till we see any numbers on this, and it's going to be posturing before that. I don't think it has to be this way. You've got an opportunity here to shrink state spending, to cut taxes, to bring fairness to the system. I'm not adding any additional programs to anything, bringing efficiencies to it. This is pretty uncontroversial, so I would hope they'd come back together.
Do you have any power to stop what's happening in the House right now with Republicans
Separate branch.
Would you consider executing that power gap?
No, it's separate branch. Executive branch doesn't. But we're separate on purpose. I would encourage them to get this done, though. I mean, the voters, I respect elections. On November 6th, I was on the phone conceding an election. That's what you do. And it's 67-67. It's not temporarily for 12 days and we're going to take power for 2 years. That's not how this works. It's silly. And so I would just say from a Minnesotan perspective is just work together on a power sharing agreement. That's the way it's going to end up. And I think that can work out really well. Actually, we did it, and I will give credit to the legislators who were there. Those of you who were here at that time, we got budgets done in 2019 with that split legislature. And they did a really nice job with it. I would argue good budgets.
What do you make of the House Republican, the Secretary of State from the House Chamber?
No, I didn't hear that yet. Look, they're cosplaying right now. It's the Constitution. The Secretary of State is job to be there. So I would encourage them, don't go down this road. You're not going to win in court. You're not going to win in the court of public opinion. We've got a split legislature that is acknowledged. Just go with that. You're not going to overturn an election. You know, the judge ruled. When the first time the judge ruled and it went in their favor, they're like, yeah, listen to the judge. And now the judge rules, no, don't listen. You don't get to pick elections when you win and pretend they're okay, and when you lose, they're not. Just move on. We've got 67 in the House. The Senate figured this out. I give great credit to the leadership over there. Senators Murphy and Johnson, they handled this right. We know we're going to have to collaborate and work together. Those types of things are just silly. Yeah.
Lieutenant Governor, on the budget, you talked about some of the investments. You've been a big fan of the investments in the past. Can you talk about, are you good with the cuts? Are you good with the governor? Can you address how you feel about him in the budget right now?
You want me to address how I feel about Governor Tim Walz? I feel pretty great. Yeah, I think he looks sharp. I am here today because we have done incredible work together over the last 6 years. And my plan is to ensure that we continue to do incredible work together over the next 2 years on behalf of Minnesotans. I think, you know, in this moment, what we're really talking about is automatic growth versus being very clear about what is happening in real time in these sectors. And I think that that's responsible, and that's what we're doing. I also am a recovering legislator, and so I am under, as is Paul, so I am under no illusions that this first budget that we roll out, this initial volley, will be what we end up with at the end of the legislative session. I think there's an opportunity for us to really work together. I think that's what Minnesotans expect of us in this moment, is to work across lines of difference, to work across the aisle, and I fully expect that that is the spirit that the governor and I will be entering into as we go into this legislative session.
Governor, I have one more question about the sales tax cut. For somebody who lives in the metro, they saw a 1% sales tax increase passed by the legislature for transit, affordable housing. Also, there's that 50-cent retail delivery fee that the legislature passed in 2023. So is this really a cut for the people who live in the Suffolk County metro?
It'll still be the 0.075 from the state's 6.875 to 6.8. So it'll be in that. Locally, the decisions that they make and the decisions that local communities make, that is still entirely up to them. We're saying from the state perspective on this, we're going to do for the first time, we think we can reduce it. They're welcome to raise it again, should they choose to do so.
But the legislature raised the 1%
Yep.
sales tax increase for the
Yeah.
metro. That's separate from the local sales taxes.
Yes, for the revenue to go to those very projects in those areas. So, well, thank you all. It's good to be back with you. I'm sure we'll have this all solved here by the end of the month, and we'll move on from there. So thank you. Thanks, everybody. Thank you. Commissioner, thank you. Give you those numbers.
What is the, does it exceed whatever billion and how much?
All right, thanks.
Okay. Okay. I didn't want to waste your question.
Because it's taking up 0.7. That's higher math.